Today I'm going to show you how to set up events in your Google Analytics using Googl Tag Manager. So when people are clicking on links, clicking on buttons, watching videos, and scrolling to a certain depth on your page, you'll be able to track all of that information in your Google Analytics account and compare that against the total web traffic you're getting so that you can just understand how people are using your site. So let's dive into my Tag Manager account. So I'm assuming that you already have Tag Manager and Google Analytics installed on your site. If you're not familiar with how to do that, I've got a video that goes into detail on how to get started with Tag Manager. You can click in the cards above or in the description below to learn more about those videos. So we have Tag Manager installed and we have Analytics installed. I'm inside my Tag Manager account and I have this page open on my website. It's just a blog post, but we're going to look at some possible ways of measuring events on this specific page. How I like to use this is typically on a landing page where we're doing lead generation for a client or something like that. I'll measure events like link clicks, button clicks when people are clicking on a call to action button, when people are scrolling to a certain depth on the page, when people are clicking on the video to start watching it, when people finish the entire video, when they watch half of the video. These types of things help me share information with my client to just demonstrate how people are using the website, to demonstrate value, but also to help me understand how people are using the website so that I can potentially improve the performance of it by changing different elements and sections. So taking a look at this page here, we have some navigation links at the top, which we could measure when people are clicking. It's mainly just text and image content. If I keep scrolling, it's quite long, so it might be helpful to know to what depth people are scrolling through this page. And that will help us understand, what content people are actually consuming. And we also have a video embedded at the top here, which we can track as well. So to begin with, let's set up a scroll depth tracking. So what we're going to do is when people scroll down 50% of the page, or we can change it. We can say, because it's a long page, maybe we'll do one for 25%, one for 50, one for 75, and then one for maybe 95%. And that'll tell us of the total website traffic we're getting to this page, how many people are reaching each of those increments. So in Tag Manager, we're going to go to Variables. We're going to go to Configure. And there's going to be some default variables that are checked off. And if this is a new Tag Manager account, you want to scroll down and make sure that you have scroll depth enabled, because by default these variables are disabled. I would also recommend enabling all of the video variables as well as all of the click variables. Okay, so once those are enabled, we're going to go to Triggers. I'm going to click on New Trigger. We're going to name this. So we'll name this scroll depth 25%. And I'm going to scroll down and select scroll depth under user engagement. And we want to measure vertical scroll depth. And you can either do based on pixels or based on percentages. So I'm just going to do based on percentage just to keep things pretty simple. So the first one I'm going to do is 25%. So next we want to select when we want this trigger to be enabled. And so when any page first loads, there's three different kind of layers that load. The first one is the container, that's the first thing, and then the DOM, and then the window load is when basically all of the visible content on your page loads. So if you select container load, which would make sense logically when the page first loads, there's not going to be any content. So if somebody happens to be scrolling the moment that the page starts loading, then it could mistakenly fire this 25% scroll, even though they haven't actually scrolled down to the true 25% depth. So what we want to do here probably is leave it at the default and window loads. So once the entire content of the page has loaded, that's when we're going to begin listening for this scroll depth to trigger. And then if we said some pages, and then we selected a variable, and we said the page URL contains, if I go back here, I'm just going to copy this, the URL of this page here, and paste it in here. That means that whenever people who are visiting this specific page scroll to 25% depth, that's when it's going to fire this trigger. So we're going to press save, and our trigger is now set up. So now we're going to go to tags, and we're going to create a new tag. And so what do we want to happen when that 25% scroll depth happens? We want to send that information into Google Analytics as an event. So I'm going to say GA event, and then we'll say scroll 25%. Click on tag configuration, and I've got Google Analytics 4 installed on my site, so I'm going to select Analytics GA4 event. Under configuration tag, I'm going to select GA. That's the analytics property that I've installed, my own analytics account. and then event name. So this is what's going to show up inside your analytics account. So in this case, I'm just going to name it scroll depth and then 25%. And then I'm just going to leave all of these settings as the default. We're going to go into triggering and then select the trigger that we just set up, this one here, and press save. So right now we have 3 workspace changes that are unpublished. So if we were to exit Tag Manager right now, then we wouldn't actually be sending these events to analytics. We actually have to submit them. But before you publish them, it's always good practice to go into the preview/debug tool and actually verify that they're set up correctly and firing. So we'll go into that in a minute, but I'm going to set up a couple more events while we're in Tag Manager. Okay, so if we go back to triggers, and actually what I would do here first is go to the scroll depth and open it up and then create a copy and then name this one 50%. And then I'm just going to change this to 50, press save, go back to tags, and we're going to open up the Google Analytics scroll depth event that we just created and do the same thing. We're going to duplicate this and name this one 50%. Change the name of the event that we push into analytics as 50%. We want to delete the 25% and then select the 50% trigger that we created, press save. And then we could do the same thing for 75%, 100%, or maybe 95% because people don't always scroll all the way down to the bottom of the footer. And then we'd be good to go. But we're going to stop here and just log these 2 events. Okay, so if I go back to this page, let's think about what else might be worthwhile for us to track as an event. Now, oftentimes we'll have buttons where maybe they click it and it opens a pop-up with a form. So it's like some form of call to action button, which obviously is really important when you're getting people to opt in for a lead magnet or something like that. Now on this particular page, I don't actually have any buttons, but we can just use this piece of text here as kind of a button, pretend it's a button. So it says choose your Google account. And so what I'm going to do is 2 things. So first of all, we could either trigger this based on the text, so the text itself, or if we right click and click on inspect, as long as we're in Google Chrome, it's going to highlight that piece of text. And if you have any classes assigned to this piece of text, you'll see what that class is here. And then you might be able to trigger based on that unique class. But in this case, we don't. It's just a header 3, which is not unique to that piece of text because we have many header 3s throughout this entire article. So in this case, just the text by itself is probably unique enough. So if this was a button, we could just say, trigger this when somebody clicks onto something where the text is choose your Google account. And so we're going to go back to Tag Manager. We're going to go to triggers. We're going to click new. And we're going to title this one button and then the name of the button. So in this case, we'll just call it a CTA button. We're going to configure our trigger, and in this case we have 2 options for clicking. We can either create a trigger when somebody clicks a hyperlink, but in this case, I mean, this is not a hyperlink obviously, but if this was a button that just had a pop-up, then I don't think that's a URL because it's just like a JavaScript element as opposed to hyperlinking to another page. So in that case, I would choose click all elements. So this is when people are clicking on an element, whether it's a piece of text or just like a container on the website. Which could include a button that has a hyperlink, but it's more kind of all-encompassing. So typically I'll use click all elements as the trigger when it's a click element. Now right now it's set as the default to all clicks, so that means that whenever anybody clicks anything on this page, it's going to fire this trigger, which is not what we want. So we want to select some clicks, and then we want to take a look at the possible variables that we can use to fire this trigger. So in this case, we want to fire based on the click text. And I'll show you what all of this means in a moment when we go into that debug tool. So hang with me, but we're going to say click text contains choose your Google account, and then we're going to press save. And so what this means is when somebody clicks onto an element where the click text is choose your Google account, it's going to fire this trigger. And so because we're pretending this is a button, we're going to go to tags now. We're going to click on new. We're going to create another Google Analytics event based on that button click. So we're going to say event, we'll say button in this case, and then CTA button. We're going to click on tag configuration. We're going to select the GA4 event again. Select my Google Analytics account. We're going to say button. This is what's going to be pushed into our event section in Analytics. Button, CTA button. We're going to leave those as the default. Click on triggering and then select that CTA button trigger that we just set up and press save. Perfect. So now you can see we've got more workspace changes that are unpublished. And so let's go in now and take a look at these workspace changes. Take a look at the debug tool and make sure that these are, first of all, set up correctly. So we're going to click on preview. So it's going to open this tag assistant in a new tab. This is the Tag Manager debug tool. This is going to allow us to analyze how things are set up and just verify that everything's set up correctly. So we're going to put in the URL of the page that we're testing. So this is the correct URL. I'm going to press start. What that's going to do is open up that page in a new tab, but in a debug mode. And now that that page is loaded, in the bottom right corner, you can see it says debugger connected. We've got this green square. If we go into the tag assistant tab, we can see it's also connected and we have that green square. So this tells us that the debugger tool is connected successfully. If you want more information on how to use this debug tool, we're going to talk a little bit about it in this video, but I've made a more detailed video which you can access in the cards above or in the description below. Okay, so what we're seeing right now are, first of all, those three elements, or those three events, I guess, that happen when any page is loaded, which we looked at previously when we were setting up that analytics tag. So the first thing that happened on this page was the container was loaded, then DOM ready, and then the window loaded, so all of the page content and stuff like that. And so right now we're selecting the summary, so this is giving us a summary of all of the tags that were either fired or not fired up until this point on the page. If I go back to the page and I just click on this piece of text randomly here, go back to the tag assistant, now it's logging that click in our debug mode. If I select it, it shows us what tags were fired from that specific click. So no tags were fired, which makes sense because it was just a random thing that I clicked on. Okay, so now if I go back to the page and I just scroll down and keep scrolling, we've reached beyond 25% now, and we're probably at about 50% now too. So if I go back to the tag assistant, it might just take a moment to load. Now we have two more events, scroll depth events. So if you click on the first one here, we can see this tag was fired, GA event, scroll 25%. So if you click into this, we can see information about the property that was fired. So in this case, it's the Google Analytics 4 event. So it was successfully fired. The name of that event was scroll depth 25%. This is the container ID for my Google Analytics account. And so this is the trigger that caused this tag to fire, as well as all of the conditions that were met inside of that trigger. And so depending on the trigger that you set up, you might see some conditions that don't really make sense to you, as these don't really make sense to me. Like this one here is telling us that the scroll depth variable was fired, or like information was collected, and that I don't know what this is. But basically this is saying a person reached 25% depth on the page and the page URL contains this. And so you can see based on the check marks that all of those conditions were met, and that's all that was needed to fire this trigger, and then that caused this tag to happen. So if I back out of that and I click on this second one, we're going to see the same thing, but now for the 50%. And the same thing, we see this is the event specific to the 50% scroll, and so those were fired correctly, and that's great. Now if I go back and I find that piece of text that we set up as a button, choose your Google account, if I click onto that and then go back to the tag assistant, we have this click action that was fired, and we can see that the tag GA event button, CTA button, was successfully fired. So again, if we click into this, it's the GA4 event, it succeeded. The event name was this, that's what gets pushed into analytics, the analytics container, and then these are the conditions for that trigger. So the click text of the element was choose your Google account, and it was a click, like the mouse was clicked basically. So because it met those conditions, that tag was fired. So if I go back to that page and I just click on like a different subheader here, we can just verify that no tags were fired. If I click into that event under, as you can see, tag not fired, and I click into it, it says up here it was not fired. Again, we can see the conditions of that trigger, in this case button, CTA button, what was not satisfied was the click text contains choose your Google account. So this just verifies to us that things are set up as we intended and they're working well. So if we're happy with that, then what we can do is click on the submit button. We can give a name to this version of changes as we publish them to the site. You don't have to, you can just press publish and then skip if you'd like. And now that's being published and is actually live. So if we close out of the preview tool, I'm going to load that page once more. And now I'm going to go on this live page, try and trigger all of those events and see if they're actually pushing into analytics. So I've scrolled down 50% of the page, and now I'm going to find that button. I'm going to click onto that. So I'm in my analytics account now. If I go to real time, we can see that in the last 30 minutes, there was one user on the site. That was me. And if I scroll down, we can see some other information, including the event counts. We've got the button click event we set up and the 2 scroll depth events. We can also see this information in the engagement tab under events, but it'll take up to 24 hours before information is pushed into there. So you just need to be patient with that. But right here, we can already see that this verifies things are set up correctly and pushing information into analytics successfully. So another event I like to add and find useful is video tracking. So, whenever people are on a landing page, it's useful to see how many people are watching the video as well as what percentage of that video they're watching, just to gauge the content that we include in the video, how much of an impact is that having on the rate of conversion. So in this case, this is just an embedded video from YouTube. So what I'm going to do is go to Tag Manager again. We're going to go to triggers. Again, you need to make sure that the video variables are enabled. So make sure you do that if you haven't already. We're going to create a new trigger here. We're going to name this video and we'll call this start. So this is going to be when people just click the play button and start a video. We're going to scroll down, go to YouTube video. And so you can see we have the option to capture a bunch of different events here. But what we want to do, because we want to create a tag that pushes an event into analytics, and because we want to separate each of those events, we want to create a trigger for each one. So we're going to first create one for the start event, and then we're going to create one for when people complete or watch the whole video, and then when they're in progress. So they watch 25%, 50%, whatever it is. Or maybe there's a you can do a time threshold as well, so in a certain amount of seconds. So maybe there's an important part of your video where you have a call to action or something like that. Maybe you'd want to measure that specific point in the video. Otherwise, maybe you just want to gauge how many people watched 50% of it versus how many people clicked start and how many people watched the whole thing. So up to you there. We're going to start with the start trigger. Now this is important. Because this is just a standard embedded YouTube video, you need to make sure that we select this here, add JavaScript API support to all YouTube videos. Basically, if you don't select this, it's not going to register when people are actually clicking on the video element that's embedded. And then we're going to select where we want this trigger to be enabled. So the default here is DOM ready. Again, container load is the first one that happens. Window load is once all of the content is loaded. So it's up to you where you want this to load. I usually just leave this as the default. And then you can either do this to all videos or some videos. So again, if you have multiple videos on the page, it would be good to define the video. And in order to do that, you would select a variable. You could do the video title and then just grab the title of that video. If we went into the debug mode and clicked on the video to start, then we could look at the variables and see what other things that we could use to trigger this. But typically, because I only ever have one video on a landing page, I'll just say all videos, or like I'll do page URL and then just say page URL contains whatever the URL of this page is. That way I can kind of be specific in measuring the video performance on a specific page. But we'll just say all videos for now. And then we're going to press save. We're going to go to tags. We're going to create a new tag. We're going to call this GA event again. Video, start, tag configuration, GA4 event. Select my account. I'm going to name this video, start. Keep these as the default, and then select our trigger. Next, we're going to set one up for when people watch 50%. So we're going to call this video 50%. Select YouTube video as our trigger type. We're going to uncheck those. We're going to check progress and say 50%. Add JavaScript API. Leave that as the default. Save. Tags. New. Name it GA event. Video 50%. Configure the tag. It's a GA4 event. Select my account. Name it video 50%. Trigger video 50%. Save. And then I do the same thing and then just do it for the completed video. So create a new trigger, and then this one would be complete instead of start. So that way we can measure now who clicked the play button to start the video, who watched 50% of it, and then who completed the entire thing. Now if we go and preview those changes, we can enter that debug mode again and just verify that this is set up correctly. We're gonna press start, and once this loads, we can go back to our tag manager. It might take a moment for it to register. Now we can see YouTube video, an event happened. The tag that was fired was video started. So if we click into this, again, this is information about the tag that we're sending to Google Analytics. So the event name is video start. And these are the conditions of the firing trigger. So it's a video, and then I guess that this is just the code that gets fired when somebody presses the start button. So again, this verifies that those tags are set up correctly and that they'll be sent into our Google Analytics account. So next time we create a report for a client, in addition to the leads that we generate and the total website traffic and all the default information that we can gather from analytics, we can actually now report on all of these events as well. How many people reached 50% down the page, how many people clicked on certain buttons, how many people watched videos, what percentage of the videos did they watch. And all of that is going to be useful information for us when we're trying to optimize the page for better performance, but it's also really impressive information to communicate to your client because it shows that you've got really good command over your page and how it's performing and all of the measurement of it. It instills confidence that you know what you're doing and that you're actually the right person to be helping them with their marketing. Again, if you're interested in learning more about Googl Tag Manager and how you can use it, I've got some more videos. I've linked a playlist below with all of my Tag Manager videos, so make sure that you go check those out. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching. Consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.